Hi everyone. So today I'll be introducing our speaker, Dr. Daniel Teraguchi. He leads UC Riverside School of Medicine's admissions and pipeline programs and plays a major role in student affairs. He brings over 20 years of experience in student affairs and DEI leadership, previously serving in key roles at Johns Hopkins, Washington State University, and Carle Illinois College of Medicine. Throughout his career, he has developed pipeline programs, advanced holistic admissions, and supported inclusive student communities. He holds 3 degrees from Idaho State University, including his EDD, and will serve as the Health Science Associate Clinical Professor in Social Medicine, Population, and Public Health. Welcome.
Thank you for that introduction. Let's see if I can get my slides up here. All right, hopefully you can see the slides. So thank you for that introduction. All right, let's see. I'll need help. Let's see if I can pull up and get my everything set up here, get the chat set up. All right, this is gonna be a little bit interactive for people. Looks like we got quite a few people on. I'm curious of those who attended, including my colleagues that are helping facilitate. What is a community-based medical school? So UCR School of Medicine is a community-based medical school. What does that mean to you? Go ahead and put that in a chat.
You guys could type in the chat.
Yeah, what is a community-based medical school? I can't tell if the chat's working or not.
It should be, yeah, it is.
Are there comments coming in? Can't tell.
I think they're shy.
Well, we're going to be stuck on the slide unless there's responses. Steve and Marco, what is a community-based medical school?
I put in the chat. So medical schools whose missions who are to train and teach future doctors with motives to help those from the community, specifically from the region and area of the medical school.
Yeah,
Steve, what do you think?
Similar to bounce off of Marco, I just, very much, for the people, and I like that it's just serving that population that resides near like the IE Empire, especially specifically for Riverside.
I see a lot of folks have similar things. So this is what's confusing about a community-based medical school that's there. I think you're all focused on the word community. A lot of great things in the chat. But what it means is we don't have a hospital. Okay, a community-based medical school. I think, Steve, you mentioned you're at UC Irvine, right? If you go to the medical school there, they have an attached hospital. It's called Academic Medical Center. So what it means to be a community-based medical school, what's really great about UCR School of Medicine, this came from the community, but there's not an attached hospital to it. And there's a lot of shortage of physicians in this area. So what that means is one of the reasons they created this is to help create more physicians in this area. Now, what's very interesting about UCR School of Medicine in general, that means without a hospital, we use community-based clinics to do our training. So we have clinical sites all across the Inland Empire, our training sites. Now, what's very interesting about some stats, about 70% of physicians practice in community clinics. That means medical schools that have an academic medical center, if you're trained there, it's not the typical training that 70% of physicians typically need to be out in the community clinic. So what's really great about UCR School of Medicine is you get to learn all different kind of community clinics. Many of you, if you've been in Southern California, you've probably been in family clinics, with different systems, different kind of waiting rooms, different electronic medical records, all those kind of things. So that's what we train you at UCR School of Medicine, at different clinics all over the Southern California Inland Empire as well. So that's what a community-based medical school is. It did come from the community, but it's really that it means we don't have an attached hospital as associates. Now, what's really great Many of you may have heard, we are moving in that direction to have an anchor, to have more training opportunities for our students. We are looking at an academic medical center to be part of the med school that will be opening over the next 5 to 8 years near our school. So that's really great news. It helps with more training, allows us to open more residency programs to kind of keep people here at home. But for right now, we really engage clinical partners all across inland Southern California. So this is part of our mission, really to expand the workforce and all our specialties affect our communities, especially those that are underserved throughout inland Southern California. Many of you may have heard, I'm sure many of you have gone to a doctor's office. There's long waits. Many of you can't get appointments for 2-3 months. So we really want to make sure that we have physicians that are committed to this area. Now, you don't have to be from this area, but we definitely want to make sure you are contributing to our local area. Particularly, we're looking at shorter areas from family medicine, internal medicine, pediatrics, OB-GYN, general surgery, and psychiatry. But we do need specialists in all different areas. But we are focused in that area, and we do train people in different areas, but we do focus on those shortage areas in particular. We also want physician leaders, really creating innovative solutions to eliminate health inequities and create access to quality healthcare, as well as focusing on advancing medicine through novel ideas, whether it's preventive medicine, community health, patient advocacy, and technology integration. So we really want you to have an impact in the community. We train you to have direct patient care, but we know that we want you to create a ripple effect in your community, whether it's doing health education, outreach, but having a larger impact beyond individual healthcare. And as I mentioned, we really want to make sure we improve the health of people we serve, particularly in our region and underserved communities. All right, so some of you may those, if you look at the map of California, one of the things in this area, we have a big geographic area, but one of the poorest ratios to physicians to the population. It used to be around 35, 34 physicians per 100,000. So even in the short, a little bit over 10 years that UCR School of Medicine's been here, we've been able to increase the percentage to 41 to 100,000. And many of you know your physicians are retiring, so we need to replace all those physicians. So we really want to make sure that we're increasing the workforce in our geographic area. All right, this is going to be interactive. These are 3 students, or applicants, I should say. You all have to help me pick which one gets into UCR School of Medicine. You can only pick one, okay? So student A, from Southern California, single parent home, but went out of state for college on an athletic scholarship. The BCMP, which is their science GPA, biology, chemistry, math, and physics, is a 3.4. MCAT in the 70th percentile. Parent is alumni of UCR. Activities focused for Spanish-speaking populations, for tutoring to access to healthcare. Older 3 children, had to work through college, support themselves. Siblings wants to return to IE to be closer to family. Okay. Student B is from Northern California, attended a private university in inland Southern California, has a science GPA of a 3.9, MCAT in the 90th percentile. The mother is a physician. Father works at home. Activities focus on research to address health disparities in IE. Start a nonprofit to support foster youth. Provide free tutoring and prep service for standardized testing. Gonna move my pictures of people. Student C graduated from Inland Southern California High School, started at a community college, transferred to Cal State San Bernardino, got a science GPA of a 3.2, MCAT of a 30 percentile, first gen community service and helping unhoused and underserved populations in the Inland Empire, parents work in construction and office position. So to the folks attending, you can only pick one. Student A, student B, or student C. Who do you pick to be enrolled? You can only pick one. And as you type it, and I want to know why. Why are you picking the one that you're choosing? 1 or 2 words. So I'm going to pick on Steve and Marco here a little bit. If Steve, if you had to pick one of these 3, what one would you pick and why?
This is a tough one. They're all really good, at least like from what it seems like, you know.
It's
and
like
I,
every
I,
applicant, right? There's a ton of applicants, but which one do you pick?
it's just they all really have strong ties to the IE as well. So it's like, I would say, Marco, what do you think?
You know, from an objective standpoint, if I were to be admissions, in addition to like the missions of all of these applicants, I feel that the easiest decision would be B, but me being my own self and what my choice wants to be, I feel like A would be what I would choose. But those are just what my ideas are.
Yeah,
So
I would also agree with that as well.
tell me a little bit more. I see in the chat, people are looking at some of the academic metrics. What, Margot, tell me more about why you're leaning on B, but it sounds like your heart is picking A.
I think that B, the GPA, the MCAT, their research background, having family, I don't have family that are in medicine, but I could see how that could be beneficial for those who have a little bit of background already for that. But then also for A, having family in that area, plus having the background of Spanish speaking, knowing that IE has a large Spanish speaking population, as well as a lot of their involvement, I feel that. Personally, I feel more tied to letter A compared to B, but I could see where B would be chosen over A.
What about C? They went to community college. Isn't this a community
You're
college?
so right. You're so right. Yeah, I'm not trying to look over C either, but you're right. Damn. Okay, wait, let me think again.
Right. So Steve, as you think about this, what's important in med school as you think about these things, right? There are certain, but you all focus, a lot of you focus on metrics in some way, right? That's only one piece of the story. That doesn't mean, how many of you go to the physician and ask them what their scores are? Probably never, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that nobody will ever, after after your first day of med school, nobody will ask you about your MCAT score or your GPA. Nobody cares.
Right. So Steve, as you think about this, what of these characteristics, what translates to be a good medical student? If you had to pick something beyond academics, what makes them a good physician?
I would say ties to the community, like the community that they're serving specifically. What I like about student A is Spanish speaking, like they support Spanish speaking populations, which is highly prevalent in the IE empire. So that would really be available. That would be like very like translational to, their like day to day as a physician. I also do like about what I like about A is that their resistance and they had to work throughout college. They want to return to the A to be closer to the family. They have strong ties and they have that drive to keep going up.
Yeah. So the reason I do this exercise is it's hard to pick them without knowing the full story, right? So not one of these. How many of you could put your full story of who you are in one of these boxes? Does it tell you everything about you, what makes your character, who you are as a physician? Probably not, right? But they are snippets of what you could be. I do want to point out there's a lot of research on metrics, even though all of them have metrics that would be successful in med school. There's almost no difference in performance among the group that's here. So I know a lot of you pick B for some of the data that's there, but that's also something of a bias, right? Looking at great metrics. I'm sure there are people that have done well. I'll tell you, my GPA in undergraduate was less than a 3.0, right? Doesn't define who I was. Some of you find different rhythms quicker. Many of you know if you've gone to community college, and particularly if you come to UCR school, UCR undergraduate, you go from a semester, so 16 weeks to 10 weeks. That is rough, making that because it's quick, right? So you adjust. And that performance does not judge how well you do academically, okay? My point is here, when you're filling out an application, every component of the application tells your story, right? You don't lift out all these different pieces and think about, hey, I'm just going to lift out one thing. So making a story, and at UCR School of Medicine, it's your story that matters to us. Who you are as a person, your metrics do matter. You have to do well academically, but it doesn't tell the whole story. It's one component of you, right? If I had to pull out one grade that defined who you were, I'm not sure that would be fair. That would articulate your capacity as to do well academically, what that looks like. So why this is hard, that's why all the different parts of your application become important. There seem to be a lot of difference of opinion. I think, Marco, you even picked like you identify with one and very personally what that looks like, right? And maybe that's the kind of position you would like them to treat you in certain ways, right? But you're also looking at B as, will they graduate? Will they have all the material, right? And so all of them academically, I have no concerns about them doing well academically. And so now how do we choose between them? And so I'm going to walk through a little bit. I'm sure when you get advising, how do you distinguish yourself? But at UCR School of Medicine, it is about who you are as a person, your attributes, your characteristics, as well as your metrics, right? But I just want to point out that one component of those does not tell your whole story. So your ability to tell your whole story through the application is very important to us at UCR School of Medicine. So I'm going to walk you through some of what we look at. All right. Some of you have mentioned, maybe, I think even Marco, you mentioned, one of them had a physician, and so they're giving probably a lot more advice to their child about how to do this, and you may not have that, right? So you're looking at this, it may not be. So again, we're going to be a little bit interactive here. When I say metrics, and I'm going to pick on Steve and Marco a lot just because of the way the format is. If I said metrics, but if you put in the chat, when I say metrics, what does that mean to you? What does that mean? So Steve, if I say metrics, what things am I thinking about?
To me, metrics just means the objective numbers of like GPA, the BCM, and the MCAT.
Yeah, those are the two that come out. Anything else you can think of, Marco, that would come under metrics?
I guess number of hours in terms of shadowing, clinical volunteering, non-clinical volunteering, leadership, all that type of stuff.
Little bit. I would put those in different areas. I think you're thinking about kind of quantitative measures.
Right.
So one thing that people often miss too is grade trends. Okay. So for example, let's say some of you may struggle like I did coming out of high school, a lot of independents going to college. Sometimes you have to work. Your GPA isn't very good. So maybe in the first 2 years of school, not so good. The last 2 years, very strong. So even though your GPA, let's say it's a 3.1 science GPA, but most of your A's were at the end, that matters, okay? There's actually some research that shows, I think it's the last 48 credits, I may be misquoting that, the last 48 credits that you take, particularly in the sciences, kind of predict how you're doing academically. So metrics can look at grade trends. There's also different kinds of GPA, right? The cumulative versus the science GPA. There's also postgraduate things that are there. So say you have a lower GPA, but you did really well. Some of you may think about doing a postbac, doing a master's. So again, maybe as you look at different schools, what the GPA kind of requirements are. Now at UCR School of Medicine, we take into that all context. Again, it's a story. Many of you have different academics, have different things. Maybe you had a death in the family where you had a dip, right? What you want to do in your metrics is make sure you explain it. So if you have a metrics that maybe you have an upward trend, so you struggle, you want to make sure you explain that somewhere and pick recommenders that help talk about your longitudinal growth academically. I always teach some medical students that their answer for any metrics, they're going to power through it. I'm sure nobody attending this seminar has never crammed for an exam. Never. I'm sure nobody's ever done that. Right. But we know everybody has to cram for exams and where that is. Now, what's important in medical school, there's just too much information coming at you, so you can't cram. You got to learn how to stay on top of the material and learning how to study. And so oftentimes, many of you, I'm sorry, you transition, particularly if all of you gone to community college, you're going to have multiple transitions: high school, community college to a 4-year, maybe 4-year to a graduate program. All those transitions affect how you're going to succeed. And so learning how to adapt to the content come at you can be an important story that your metrics tell you. You may not have learned because you didn't have the mentoring that's there, but you catch up. So you want to make sure people can tell that story, particularly if you feel like you're not strong academically. You need to help us understand it and be able to articulate that. And getting faculty recommenders, picking the right folks to tell that story longitudinally would be great as well. All right, a question here. Are paid experiences or unpaid experiences? Which one is more important? I'll pick on Marco. So which one's more important, unpaid or paid? And if so, why?
I feel like the decision is too subjective to pick one or the other. It depends on what it is and what it means to the person, how they like describe it. So I don't know if I could pick one or the other. I don't think it matters personally.
Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, to piggyback off of what Marco said, I think what it comes down to is the meaningfulness and the impact that came from them, not whether if it's paid or unpaid.
Good answer. It does matter in terms of kind of what it means, right? So there are different things that come. So unpaid, right? So volunteer experiences, what you're passionate about, right? Be able to explain that. So those are things that can come that as part of the motivation to understand what that is, and that you're showing passion, because it's not about the payment piece of it, right? Also, the paid experiences, sometimes it's a necessity. I don't know how many of you have had to work through college. I'm assuming many of you have to do that, right? So the paid experiences, but you learn different things. So Marco and Steve, now I've asked the question differently. What did you learn differently in a paid experience than an unpaid experience? Now, I'm asking more rhetorically, but they're different experiences, right? And what they're demonstrating. And so you're right, it's the relevance and build explain. So I was working with a medical student who had to work out through college, but he mostly worked at like auto stores and wasn't sure what to put on their experiences, because it's not really related to medicine. Now, what was really cool about his job was within both opportunities, I think within 3 or 4 months, he was automatically promoted to manager. And as a manager, he had to supervise 8 to 10 people, something to that effect. If any of you have had to supervise people, even been on a work project, it's hard. Supervising people is difficult. People are people. And imagine you have to do performance review. How many of you feel comfortable giving constructive feedback to a peer? It's not easy. But when you're working with a patient, you're going to have to give news, bad news, right? News, be able to do that, right? So it teaches you a lot of different experiences that are there. So making sure you're telling that story. So as you think about this whole application, what those look like. Okay. All right. Another question. How important is research experiences? Super important, not so important? What do you all think? Steve, what do you think? How important is research experience?
From what I've seen, or like from what I've heard, it's just mainly, it depends on the school's mission. So if it's more of like a research heavy institution where they value research, then obviously that will play more into admissions committee or admissions process. But if it's more, if their admissions are like more community or sometimes not as focused on research, then there's a bit more leeway and it's not maybe necessary, but could still boost your application nonetheless.
It's like you've been to several of these seminars before. Marco, what do you think?
I think personally research is important, whether it's wet lab, clinical, some sort of is it social science too? I think all forms are very important. What it means to the person on top of just the applicability that it has in medicine, and how they're able to convey that is important. So just experience that's helpful to support why they're going into medicine.
I think you're both going to correct it. I'm going to sort of reiterate what Steve had said. You do need to tailor your application to the school, right? Making sure your mission. So we're very clear at UCR School of Medicine what our mission is, right? So you want to tailor what that looks like. So you want to make sure you're a good match. If you're looking for a certain kind of research experience and you're going to med school that doesn't have that, right? It's going to be a mismatch what's there. However, I'll build on what Marco said. To me, research is important no matter what, because it's what it's teaching you. Can you identify a problem? Can you create a hypothesis of what an intervention would be? And can you assess whether it's effective or not, right? And it doesn't have to be in a wet lab. I often sometimes think people that go to wet labs or a lab, if you're in a lab where they're not helping you understand the scientific process, you're really just pipetting or doing a piece of project, you're not really learning about the scientific process, right? So a lot of them will do journal clubs. You sort of tear apart the article, look at the methodology, but can you ask good questions, different problems? And what we love at UCR School of Medicine, people bring all sorts of ways of seeing the world, right? You all, wherever you sit, asking curious questions. That's what we're looking for, right? Because if you experience the world differently, you ask questions differently. So there may be, Margo, you mentioned that maybe you don't have a physician in your family, but I'm sure you've had family that goes to a healthcare and you wonder, why does it work this way? There's got to be a better way to do this, right? There's a research question there, but you don't stop there. What's your hypothesis, right? What is your intervention? And then how do you assess that intervention may work or not? So it doesn't matter what it is. It's really understanding the scientific process And you can get that lots of different ways. It doesn't have to be in a lab. You could be in a social research, but it's being able to identify issues, problems, come up with a solution, and understands that solution works or not, and be able to adjust, okay? But if you love research, do lots of research, but it's really about the scientific process. Clinical exposure. Now, the main reason that that's there, many of you may know, it's really to make sure that you understand what being a clinician looks like, and in that space. Now, some of you may not get a lot of exposure, because there's a lot of different ways to look at clinical exposure. Some of you may be caretakers. So it's making sure you articulate that in your essay. Maybe you're taking care of a grandparent or a family member, a sibling, right? That can also be seen as clinical exposure. You do want some more formal pieces where you're actually in a clinic to see the operations, understand the role that a physician may be able to work in those different spaces, having to work with patients, giving difficult news, even as they transition to other stages of their life, being able to work with that family member. So making sure you get that exposure. The one thing we're missing in my example with the 3 students, student A, B, and C, was the personal statement, right? There's a chance to tell your story. And so that's really important. So I often tell folks in your personal statement, don't explain your entire life in this personal statement. It's impossible to do it in such a small piece. Look at your full application and pick something that helps round out your application to tell a story that maybe doesn't occur somewhere else. Now, one of the main problems that students do in the personal statement is start listing what they do. I did this, I did that, I did this. It does not help me, right? Because that's somewhere else. It doesn't add a story of texture of what you bring to the table. So make sure you think about how to show me something. It could be a value. It could be something that's important. So I'll give you an example. I was interviewing a pre-med student once, and we did a kind of a 20-minute interview. I asked all these questions. I could close my eyes, and it could be any applicant. And if you meet me, if you're on my research team, I often ask a student, I'll teach you a little bit, Steve Mark. You don't have to answer this question, but I said, please introduce yourself, but tell me something that is not on your resume. I get blank stares when students do that, because they say, well, that's the first thing they say. I think even, Steve, when you're just yourself, you send me what college, what your major, what year you were. But it doesn't tell me anything about who you are as a person, right? Right? Do you have siblings? What do you love? Like all those kind of things, right? So that personal statement has to tell the story. So I was interviewing this pre-med student, and it's the typical, I did this, I did that. But they mentioned that they were shy. And I thought that was interesting. And I looked on their CV, and they had biked across the country. Now, what was interesting about that story, if any of you biked across the country, have ever done something like that, you can't be shy because you have to ask strangers for help. So I asked, why did you do that? She said, I had to test myself that I could overcome my shyness before I go to medical school. Now, I learned more about her character in that single sentence than her entire 20-minute interview. So when you take your personal statement, it's not about, I can tell my life story of everything I've done. I'm going to convince you I'm the best applicant ever. What it is telling me who you are. How do you know you're ready for med school? Have you been exposed? Understanding patients, what that looks like. And I've read a couple essays where, if you look at that student B, who had a parent that's a physician, I was working with a pre-med student, and they're trying to articulate what that meant. And it was interesting, their story, because part of it was they despised medicine, because what happened was their parent was never home. Okay, it's not the same dynamic as student B, but they realized that the parent that was a physician just was never home. It actually created so much turmoil in the family that the family actually broke apart, because the one of the parent wasn't there. So in their story, they didn't understand. They thought, what is this medicine? Why is my parent choosing medicine over the family? So that made them kind of angry. So they're walking through the story, but something always kind of pulled them towards helping people, from the parent. So they're always gravitating, particularly to older people. So they started like a geriatrics group in college, but they ended up being a CNA, certified nurse assistant, at more of a hospice kind of assisted living care. So she's talking to the patients. Can you guess what happened? She couldn't go home. She didn't want to leave the patients. And all of a sudden, she understood what sacrifice means. And that gave so much more insight of understanding what medicine is about, and that she was ready to make certain sacrifices. Because when you're going to med school, being a physician, you're going to miss family parties. You're going to miss certain things here, right? There's this pull towards patient care if you're depending on lifestyle. So do you see how I call it 180 degrees? You tell a single story to make a point. There's nowhere else in application that would say that. And now, Marco, now if I told you that was person B, now you might choose them a little bit more over that student A, right? Because of their insight, the way they articulated their story, right? Because they were able to tell an aspect of them that was hidden or not so much seen in that. So personal statements become very important that are there. Rec letters. Something that you really have to think about is balancing out your rec letters. You definitely need academic letters from people that know you academically, but we also want to make sure that people get to know you, right? So imagine I'll say Steve was my faculty member. Say, I asked Steve to be write a letter, and basically says you are number one in the class, we're doing good academically, but that's all they know about you. And so really make sure you make relationships with your faculty, go to office hours. If it's been something that maybe you did in community college, now you're 4-year, keep in touch with them so they can tell a more longitudinal story, see things outside the classroom as well as academic. So making sure you're picking those. If we go back to the metrics, if you have a particular story about your metrics where you start off a little bit on the lower end and really picked up at the end, you want somebody who can tell that story, who's seen that longitudinal growth in you, maybe maturity. And the student I just talked about sacrifice, showing the maturity of understanding what medicine's about. It's not just helping people. Understanding the demands of the profession can be super important, and that they've got that exposure and that they're ready for that kind of commitment that's there. Things where many of you have made mistakes. I've made mistakes. How do you absorb that, take accountability, and grow from that, right? Rather than, not that any of you have done this. Sometimes, when you have a nobody runs towards conflict. You don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to go have a conflict with a friend, right? Most people run away from conflict, but talking about leaning into that. What are your strategies, thinking about that, and having a faculty member say, this person is ready to lean into those kinds of things, to think about maturity, what those are. So just make sure your rec letter is not all telling the same story over the same piece, right? Particularly if you have glaring holes or gaps or things you're worried about, you want your rec letters to help tell a story that you are ready for med school. Secondary applications. These are often questions that medical schools write that they specifically want you to hear. So UCR School of Medicine, we have secondaries. So these are things you have to pay important to. So one thing I want to make sure you're aware of, don't spend just all your time on personal statement pieces. I know there are probably floating out there somewhere sample secondary questions where they're also begin to work on those, because if you start to apply to medical schools, you get these secondaries come fast and quick. And if you're not a good writer or take a lot of time to write things, you want to practice writing these out. So just don't get caught off guard by not treating the secondary with the time that is needed. And a lot of schools have some similar questions, so you can modify and tailor them as you go, but you want to learn how to write. And when the secondaries come out, you don't want it just to be, hey, I'm just going to write kind of an email response. You want to be refined and intentional about those things. Same thing with interviews. It's all about practice, making sure you have opportunity to practice. So I've been working with a PhD student, and they were horrified because I said, they came in with their computer ready to present. I said, I'm going to make you shut off your computer. Her face went, oh, hell, because she wanted to rely on the computer. And I said, you need to learn how to interact without the screen. So we've been doing that 3 or 4 times just to practice getting comfortable in a space, be able to do that. So I always tell our medical students, to perform well, you got to know the content. It's the other 3 that tend to be the most important. Your confidence. How do you build confidence, right? A lot of practice, a lot of cheerleading, making sure you have a growth mindset, reaffirming all the great things that you're doing. But you also need efficiency. You need to learn how to do it quickly as well. And so those are things that you really need to think about in terms of interview practice. It's a skill. You can't just show up and be able to articulate. I just to tell you a technique that I use with some of our students here at UCR School of Medicine when they're doing interviews. I'm sure none of you do this either. You get a question, you have no idea how to answer it, so you start rambling. Never happens, right? You start rambling, but the technique that I teach them is if you can summarize it at the end, once you figure out what you're going to say, summarize your points at the end, they will actually not remember what you rambled at the very beginning, but they'll remember the end, right? So again, it's a technique. It's a skill level. So make sure you get that feedback. People know when they send me their essays and practice with me, I am supportive, but I set high expectations and I help you meet those expectations. So the feedback that I give, I usually don't say, well, that was great. I do say, gosh, you have really good skills. Here's my base, but I give a lot of feedback on how you present yourself. As you know, you can probably tell I'm walking right now. I obviously wouldn't recommend that you walk, but how your presence, how you set up, where you put your camera, how you look at the screen, all those things matter in terms of interviews. So again, you want to be able to do that. So these are things we really take an account at UCR School of Medicine. We know different people have different levels of resources that are there, but telling your story, you all can figure out a way to tell your story, but all these components that matter, okay? So the main thing here is identify an attribute, passion, or value that you want to do. So if you think of compassion, so again, Mark, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. So if your attribute or the thing that you want to sort of communicate to an admissions committee is about you're compassionate, how would you write that in an essay? Like, how do you show compassion, right? It's hard, right? What you typically might do is list an activity that you did that was compassionate, right? And so being able to articulate, I always tell people you need to show, not tell. So the way that I do it, for me to show compassion, I am a person that's very sensitive to smells. They're very hard for me. So when I work with unhoused populations, it really tests my comfortability because it's very difficult for me. But I need to prove myself because it's easy to be compassionate to people that you get along with, or it's easy to work, right? You're still kind and everything, but picking a population that may be very challenging for you in difficult situations really can demonstrate how you're trying to be compassionate in a greater sense and build a show. So like smells, I remember working with a woman, we were helping take care of her. She had a colonoscopy bag. And I remember she was so embarrassed with the colonoscopy, and I had to drive her, and she was so worried about the smell. So I practiced for weeks of how to breathe just through my mouth. So if there was smell, you would not smell anything. So I'm driving in the car, confined. It's winter, so it's cold outside. You can't open the windows. So I remember she had to use the colonoscopy bag, and the smell was not good. So my breathing came into technique, and she didn't notice it at all. But I had to learn that technique to be able to not make her feel bad, right? So again, telling those stories of showing how you can be compassionate in those different ways, okay? So I call it 180 degrees. Pick something you want to articulate about yourself and develop the whole idea in the personal statement. Don't try to do 14 different things in the personal statement, okay? Tell a story all the way across and make sure things complement each other and you're telling your overall story. So that's the main point of this slide. All right, let me talk a little bit about specifically UCR School of Medicine. This will be a little bit more just informative. These are just our requirements that are there. So I'll go through it so everybody's aware. So we have our biology, our general chem, physics, and math. You can see the number of hours that are needed there. We do count labs as part of that. And anything that is on your transcript, we do count. So if you have the AP credit, International Baccalaureate, so as long as it's on your transcript, it's counted through that piece. They do count towards that piece. We have some recommended pieces as well. We do look for broad experiences, but those aren't required. They're just recommended. They're there. So just make sure you meet the requirements. The way it works in med school, you can apply without meeting those requirements, but before you matriculate to med school, you must make sure you meet those. Otherwise, your offer can be rescinded. So you don't have to have these when you apply, but you definitely need to make sure you have them before you matriculate. So these are some frequently asked questions. You do not need to be a science major. We do accept all different backgrounds. You do, again, need to make sure you meet our requirements. We do not have a minimum cutoff MCAT or GPA. Like I said, we look at the whole story. Sometimes those GPAs and MCATs don't tell your true story, and they can be skewed in certain ways. It may not include your graduate work, it may not include your post-bac work, it may not include your grade trend in the way that we'd like. So we're very thoughtful about looking at each application. So Procedures, obviously, many of you may know this if you have advising, you have your MCAS application. We need your official academic transcript, three letters of recommendation, sort of articulating your qualifications, max of 5 letters. We do a headshot, solid background. We don't use that in the evaluation of the application. It's really to make sure when you show up for our interview that you are the person that you say you are. And then we have the dates that are there for the AMCAS and some deadlines for the MCAT. I won't go too much detail into those. We do use medical mini interviews at our school. Many people wonder why we use this. Researchers show many of you have gone to an interview. If you only have 2 interviews or only 1 interview and you don't do well, it can really affect your score. So the way, what we call MMIs, it gives you a much fairer chance to perform on the station. So if you get a question that you're not familiar with, or maybe it's uncomfortable, it doesn't take you for the interview. So you have to show a pattern over all the different stations. So this really gives you a much more fair and equitable way to be assessed around different sorts of questions. So again, if the question is unfamiliar with you, or something that maybe you face personally and maybe a little bit harder to answer, it allows greater flexibility in evaluating candidates. And then our financial aid, we are very proud of what we call mission awards. What this means is we cover, offset the cost of most of your medical education. In return, you come back and serve our region for 5 years. So basically almost all of your medical education is covered. But the only thing we ask is you come back and serve our area. So if you don't serve, it turns into a loan. But if you come back, it's called a grant. You don't have to pay us back. Okay. So that's really important to us. That's why we call mission awards. A lot of schools offer scholarships, but this helps. If you're already going to practice, it helps us with our workforce, right? Because if you get the mission award, you have to come back and serve us. So that's why we're very proud of those different things. Our financial aid office works really well to find scholarships. And what's been really great about our community here in Inland Empire, Inland Southern California, is the community has really reached out. We're getting lots of folks coming out to contribute to the medical school to help offset the cost of tuition. So what that means is tuition and fees. Many of you know, you live in this region, gas is very important. So we provide gas scholarships to be able to drive. As I mentioned, we have clinics all over the region. Things of paying for a test. Many of you are probably studying or will study for the MCAT. It's not cheap, right? So paying for these step tests or licensing exams that are there. So we really try to support our students. What's been great about our community, they know we're generating physicians to help our region. They really want to support students to stay here. So they've been contributing. So we have a great community that's invested in your future. And then I will pause there to see if there's any questions. So I'll take off the sharing screen and see if we can open it up for any questions that the folks might have.
Thank you so much for that lovely just like the whole introduction to the program. And I really love your style that was really hands-on and really informative. So our first question that we have is, I have a bachelor's in politics and economics already, and I'm trying to transition into medicine. Can I do all of my classes at community college with upper divs as needed, or is it recommended that I do a formal post-bac? Can I also research at ACC level?
So there's not one way to get there. I mean, it depends on your circumstance. Sometimes, if you're transitioning, you just have to make sure you meet the requirements that are there. Now, post-bacs have pros and cons. You can also look at master degrees. That way you walk away with a degree. One of the challenges sometimes with post-bacs that aren't degree seeking, so you don't end up with a degree at the end. They may not qualify for financial aid, so you have to pay for them, and you don't walk away with a degree at the end that's employable. So those are kind of pros and cons to post-bacs. What's great about our master's program and post-bac is that it's degree seeking. So you walk away with a master's and you get support in the med school as well. So we do have a post-bac program that you get a master's degree that's there. It's, I don't know what your finances are, but you just need to make sure you can graduate, go to a post-bac, and make sure you meet all the requirements that are there, whether it's at a community college. We don't distinguish that community college or four-year institution is different. The course is the course. You've taken it and done well in it. So it depends on your circumstance. Just make sure you meet those requirements. I wouldn't suggest, it makes sense to do another bachelor's, to do that, or post-bac, but it may be a convenience for you depending on your location, what there is, whether maybe they offer online affordability. I often sort of lean towards master's program, mostly because you get a degree. And if finances are important, they can offer financial aid because you're in a degree seeking program, where postbacks, they have to raise their own money for scholarships.
Follow-up question that we have in the chat. Somebody was asking, what does this mean for students who are not born in the Inland Empire, but have been getting involved in the region while being an undergrad student here? And a follow-up to that was, how does UCR SOM value academic metrics versus family ties to the IE?
Well, I am not from Inland Southern California, and they let me in. So it's really your commitment to our mission. So you don't have to be born here. We do want to see that your contribution, but we're also looking at the health of California generally, right? So we want to produce more physicians in California. We do look at specifically our region, but you do want to be able to be invested. We also look at sort of communities that represent our area, whether it's in underserved communities, create intervention in those areas, and be able to translate. So we've had students who've done all that work in Northern California, and they describe that they want to come down here, be able to translate that. Maybe if they're from like the Bay Area, maybe it's more affordable, but they want to translate all those skills, be able to invest, working with more access to healthcare, be able to build that. So you just have to kind of tell us what your plan is and how you connect with the mission that is there. And the second part was like GPA and family ties.
Yeah, like how does the School of Medicine value academics metrics versus family ties?
So again, it's the story, right? Not one piece tells the whole story. So can't pick one. You got to tell us your whole story. And so when I showed all those different components, it's making sure you tell a full story of who you are. I'm going to tease Steve a little bit. Steve, I'm assuming you don't have a T-shirt with your metrics that you walk around with on your shirt, and that's how you're defined, right? There's more to you to that, right? So you want to look beyond that. It'd be weird if you actually wear a shirt with your GP on it, I think.
Or like tattooed on my forehead or something. Okay, our next question that we have, is there a way to integrate naturopathic/homeopathic practices in healthcare system in Los Angeles?
It's not my expertise, so I'm not sure how to respond. I'm sure there are opportunities to do that, but there are a lot of move toward naturalistic homeopathic methods. But we do here at UCR School of Medicine. Part of what's great is you have an opportunity to contribute. We have research that you could do in that area, but I'm not sure I answered the question specifically. But our job is to train you to be a great physician. You certainly can do research in those different areas as well.
Another question from chat. I know you mentioned about majors not mattering when applying, but they're asking, is there a preference in starting off with a bio major while in community college and undergrad versus getting a degree in another major and doing a post-bac to finish the prereqs for medical school?
There's no preference on our end. It's really, many of you, Marco and Steve, I'm sure you are aware of this too. It's about sequencing and how you get your degree and how you be able to move through that piece of it. So I've been working with a community college, and I'm learning a lot about dual enrollment from the high school. And a lot of times they say in your dual enrollments, get all your gen eds through dual enrollment and do that just because there's labs and different equipment, faculty. So it depends on your context. There's no particular order that's there, but it's about sequencing, because if you sometimes miss a course, it can force you to, if you're out of sequence, to do an extra semester, an extra year. So, but for UCR School of Medicine, that's not as important as long as you get all our requirements.
And again, post-bac programs are very expensive and you don't get financial aid. So some of the, you could, and some people do their DIY post-bacs, but it's kind of like, why reinvent the wheel twice where you could, do it once? I don't know, that's my thinking, but.
Well, and I think the most complicated, because at community college, you have kind of different transitions. You have high school, community college, and 4-year. The hardest part of going to that path is the sequencing, because people call courses different things. I'm sure, Marco and Steve, if you have been in community college, the credits don't match, right? The hours. So that's the hardest part, is matching everything through. So when you get to the end, you're meeting all the requirements. So getting good advice. So this is a great organization to help you think about. It's called intersegmental advising, making sure everything lines up that's there. We're actually working with out in Coachella Valley to be able to line up so that you can go from high school and then go to a community college. And then we're a direct link to the 4-year college so that all the courses are all predefined and they're all just set in place. And that's why they were telling us the dual enrollment, do all your gen eds while you're in high school, get all your sciences that they're just mostly the equipment and the accessibility thing. Not that it's better or worse in high school, but it's the accessibility to certain things. Most high schools don't have full functioning wet labs, all those kind of things that are there. So getting your labs, chemistry there, and then transitioning to the major to make sure you get all your requirements for the med school. So it's really the advice. I'm sure Steve and Marco, you could agree with that. If you make a mistake, it could cost you a year or something else just because you're out of sequence.
Okay. Our next question says, if possible, could you please share the average number of hours that applicants typically have for research, clinical, shadowing, and volunteer activities?
And it's the whole story, right? So, like, for example, there may be a student, I'll pick on Marco, I don't even pick a background, but say, you've had to work your entire time through school. And so your numbers are going to be skewed in a different way. But often, Sharon, maybe you took care of a family member. So again, it's telling us your story. We don't have cutoffs. We want to understand your circumstance and what you've done to find the experiences. You do have to have that balance at some level, but oftentimes, so Marco, maybe you have a sick sibling that you've taken and helped throughout your life. That's a good clinic because you're in the hospitals, you're getting that experiences. But then maybe you're also volunteering as a CNA because that inspired, maybe you have an autistic sibling, right? That got you involved in working with autistic kids. They're there. So there's not one sort of cutoff. It's telling that whole story across those different categories. But I would say you need some experiences in each area. The amount can vary based on your story.
The next question we have, this person in regards to college transcripts. I took community college classes in high school. I get to do these classes contribute to my science GPA, and why I need to explicitly mention this anywhere in the MCAS app.
So I'm not an expert on how the things transfer, but I do know as long as it transfer into your undergraduate degree, that's where they usually count it and where they do that. The WNC does a verification of those pieces, but that's typically where I see where they translate. If you go from community college, the dual enrollment, making sure they all transfer the AP credits, make sure they all transfer into the college piece of it. So as long as they show up in those areas that go on your transcript for undergraduate or community college, they often are counted through the process, but the WNC will verify your coursework.
Thank you. So our next question, which actually I wanted to ask as well, is for tuition reimbursement. Do we serve years as residents, or do we have to be fully practicing attending physicians for the 5 years?
That's the question one more time.
Yeah, so the question that we have, that I also had as well, is for the tuition reimbursement for the mission scholarship that you mentioned in the presentation. You mentioned that you have to serve 5 years. Would residency count for those 5 years, or does it have to be once you're in attending or post fellowship?
It's post fellowship that you're practicing physician. So it's you have to be practicing as a physician here. So that's why we're actually creating. I mentioned early, we're trying to create that new medical center so that you can actually do your residency here and stay in the area as well. But it's as a practicing physician.
Next question was actually a follow-up to that. Just to add on, for that mission award, can you get extended if you end up in a long special after, I guess, or just extension after? I think the first time they meant was after long specialty, but now that you reaffirmed the reason, how about like an extension after they become an attending post-fellowship?
I'm not sure what extension means, but the way that it works is, whenever you complete training. So if you're in a specialty where you're doing fellowship after fellowship, as long as you've completed training, we don't dictate. We do look at certain specialties that we give the mission awards because of the shorter areas. I think I mentioned in one of the slides, the shorter areas. So you have to stay in those areas, but the training doesn't matter as long as you're doing your training. You come back in the 5 years. But say in between your fellowship and you're starting to practice physician, say you want to do a global mission trip for 3 years, probably you could be in breach of contract, what that looks like, because the agreement is to come back to do that piece. But certainly do that afterwards where you're a little bit more established. But I'm not sure if that's what they're asking. But the goal is after you complete your training, however long it takes, is to come back and serve, because that's what you agreed to, is to be able to do that. I think it's a great program, just because oftentimes we give scholarships, and you see other schools that do this, but they don't always come back to the community in which they got those scholarships.
Thank you. So the next question we have is, how do the preclinical years look at UCR, specifically step 1, dedicated time period, as well as step 2?
So for our step 1, we have well above the passing rates for national average. They have 7 weeks of dedicated time.
For the next question, I think they mean like throughout their lifetime. Is any time too early to start thinking discrete reasons why they want to become a physician?
No, I think everybody finds at different times. I know there's we had a guest speaker. I forget, she was maybe 3 or 4, and our father said something and gave her a device, and she goes, "I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a physician." And so she ended up being a physician, being able to do that. I've also seen people in second careers. I remember one of my colleagues, who's an engineer, and he realized not his field, so he went to medical school. So he got his medical degree much older. So it all depends what age you are. We've had here at UCR School of Medicine, one of our recent graduates, he was a nurse for 10 years. And he did that a lot to create a financial backing for his family. And when his family was ready to be able to transition to school, maybe at that time he got his house, he got the right daycare that he needed. So he did 10 years as a nurse, and then became he was an emergency room nurse, now is a emergency doc, right? So it doesn't matter when. I know probably I'll make fun of Marco and Steve. There's always a rush, right? You always want to rush in there and get there, but sometimes the maturity. I was working with another student. They knew they wanted to go to med school, but they could never explain it. And I could tell that they weren't ready for med school, and they had done well. And they said, when we looked at her essay, she just couldn't explain why medical school. So then eventually she got into a lab, and she's working with an OB/GYN person. And she did this amazing research with them, and she said, "I got it." And when she wrote her essay, she said, "Why I really love the research, we were able to apply it directly to the patient. And having that direct patient, really, you could see the healthcare be transformed to be able to help this person heal." And she just articulate now, it was clearly, she knew she didn't want to be research. She appreciated the research, but she said, it doesn't give me the satisfaction as I want. And it took her about 3 years after she graduated to figure that out. That's why sometimes that essay, it's hard to explain, that's okay. But sometimes it'll gel and be able to articulate. And it's okay that we need healthcare professionals in all fields. So sometimes being a physician may not be at the right time to be able to do it. There's other professions, like I said, that emergency nurse, it was the right step for them at the right stage for the right point of their family. So there's all fields of healthcare that we need help in. So don't limit yourself just to be a physician.
Thank you. Our next question says, is a DIY postbac viewed the same as a formal postbac for students who were already a biology major, but the formal postbac option was too expensive?
Do it your own can be challenging. It depends how you do it, right? So what we're going to look at potentially, right? So if one reason you may be doing it is you're bolstering your GPA or you're missing courses. So if you're just missing courses, that's different than if you're trying to bolster your GPA, right? So if you're just doing courses at DOIO and you're just meeting the requirement, if you're bolstering your GPA, it can be a whole different story, right? So we've seen people do it your own, and they're not taking the right classes to bolster their GPA. They're getting a better GPA, but they're not in the biology, chemistry, math, and physics. It's not helping them, right? And also sometimes you need the rigor. Are you doing a full load? Are you doing one or many? Because when you're med school, you're doing a lot at one time. So if you're only doing one, are you demonstrating that you can handle the rigor and still perform well academically? Okay. And that may not be possible at different times. So again, it's telling your story of what you're trying to achieve. If it's do your own, like I said, if you're just meeting the requirements, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because you're just checking off the requirements. But if you're trying to demonstrate that you're ready for the rigor of medical school, how you put it together to communicate the message matters.
Understood. For the next question, we have how many admitted students are from or attending school in the IE? How is the commitment to serving IE weighed in the admissions process?
Again, it's a big part of what our missions are to serve. Right now, our current class that's come in is 90% has some ties to the IE.
That data is posted on the website, and I put the link there. You could look at every detail of GPA, MCAT, gender, first gen.
The next question says, what's the best way to answer the question during an interview that you are not sure you can answer or can't relate to or didn't have any experience in that area? The follow-up would be, how would you answer that question?
So our questions in is about it's not like testing you of your knowledge. It's actually having you share your experiences, how you navigate different situations. So there's almost no experiences where you don't have a chance to give your opinion about something, where that is. So again, it's practicing. So for example, one skill set that I would encourage you to do is sit down, even with your friend. I don't know what young people watch now in terms of like TV shows, binge watching, right? But be able to critique a show from 4 different angles. It's actually harder than you think, because any question that you get through an MMI, they want you to evaluate things from different vantage points. So imagine if you're watching a show, how would this character in the show view X, right? If you watched a recent movie, how would somebody view it that was, seeing it for the first time or have had this experience of documenting things, or it was a comedy, what would that look like versus something else? So learning things from different vantage points will help you get away with it, but it's a skill set, right? You should be able to talk your way through at any point, but practice seeing things from different vantage points. And my best way to do it is, if you look at a TV show, if, again, I don't know what TV show young people watch anymore, but say, what would this character say about the world in that way? What would this character say about this? I think like Stranger Things is maybe, I don't know if people watch that now. We're there, right? So if you think about, if you look at, so Steve, if you had to critique it, what would that, right? If you had to live in the 80s as a parent versus somebody in the 90s, what would be the difference? But just practicing seeing things from different angles of what that looks like, what that would be there, right? I was teasing, I just went to Thanksgiving. You all will laugh at this. We're trying to watch the football game, but we couldn't figure out how to get the channel, because it really is a local channel, but there were so many different options. It was like Sling. We just needed the local channel, and we couldn't figure out how to do it. And we all remembered, we were older. We remember we just used to turn the dial to like channel 3, and that's what you're doing. But there were so many options and streaming options. We couldn't literally find the local channel that had the game on. And it was funny because they had, and I didn't know this was a thing, they had the game, but it was like animated, like a video game. But it was like live, like they were running. It was, I don't know, I just like, okay, we want to actually see the live. And then they had another one where it wasn't, they couldn't show the game, but they were just commentating. So it's all verbal. And we just couldn't find the game. So again, trying to see things from different angles and experience it, right? So for us, seeing that show, there are just so many technology, and there's like 4 different remotes. You got to click on the right thing to have the right input, right? So understanding what that may be like for an older person versus a younger person, somebody that can't hear, somebody that can't see, how do you navigate those spaces differently? So that's my main question to those things. There's always a way to articulate an answer, but you have to practice seeing things from different angles.
Thank you. Now I want to find the channel for like the animated game, but maybe that's for another time. Um, let's see. This person was asking a little bit more general. They wanted to ask if volunteer work had to be just clinical or if it could include other types of volunteer work. And then for a community college student, how would you contact a PI to get research experience?
So the volunteer experience can be whatever. It doesn't have to be a certain thing. I think it's what Steve and actually Marco had said. It's really what you're getting the value and the experience, but it's showing your passion that's there. The finding a PI, those can be difficult. We're there, but I would definitely try to work through some of your advisors and your faculty that you've met with. But if you write to a faculty member, I get this all the time. This is my point about seeing things for different points. So I don't know, Marco and Steve, when you write an email, I'm learning that our graduating medical students don't know how to write emails. Now, I think you know how to write email. So what I'm saying is they get a rotation that's at a clinic and they have to decline it. They don't know how to write a professional email. What they can say is, well, my schedule's filled and I not accept the position, right? That's an email, right? But that's not how you should write it. Okay. And so the first thing I teach them is learn what they are facing, meaning acknowledge their experience. So say a lot of these rotations, thank you so much. I'm sure you get 100 of these applications. I am so honored that you were able to pick mine to be selected. It must be a lot of work to go through that. So I can really appreciate being the honor to be able to get this position. Unfortunately, my schedule has filled up, but I'd love to, if I have other space that's here, could we move that? But I know that might be something that's not allowed or more difficult and makes a lot more work on your end. So I'm okay, but I'm so appreciative of this. I'm also very interested in your program. Maybe there's a time where I can learn more about your program, and I really want to thank you for your time. They just don't know how to articulate those different pieces. So I think that's something that when you talk to a PI, when I get an email from a student, if it says, hey, and my name, right, I immediately, I'll read it eventually, but I put it in a different folder, right? Or the first thing they say, this is what I want, right? So my question to the person writing me, how do I benefit from this interaction? What is my benefit? So Steve, if I had to do it, if I'm a PI and you're writing me, what is my benefit of having you in lab? If you had to answer that question.
Like in our email format?
Yeah, well, just anything, like, because when people write, part of the question is, how do I get a PI? So if I asked you, if you're the PI, like, I'd love to be in your lab. If I'm on the other side of it, how does it benefit for me, for you to ask me to be in your lab?
Well,
Yeah.
Steve could talk about, summer programs that he's done. I would say we've done a lot of sections on summer programs and how to get research. And some of these programs are for community college students. Yep. Marco and them both did those programs and they've networked out of there. So instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, apply to summer programs, focus on your grades during the year instead of like volunteering and research and doing well in your classes. Like you can't do all. Like there's 168 hours in a week and you need to sleep around 38 to 42 of them to be a functioning human being. And the rest of it, you're going to class and you're driving and you're eating and hopefully spend a little bit of time with your friends so you're not insane. But you want to do all these things like summer programs, and Marco and Steve could talk to you days about summer programs, but those are research dedicated. And how much do you get paid, Steve, to do your summer program down in San Diego?
The one that I did, it was 18 an hour. So it's usually they're always like at least minimum wage or even better than that, depending on the grant.
And they paid for your housing too, right?
Oh yeah, if it's like minimum wage, then they for sure pay for housing and transportation, travel fare. Yeah.
Yeah, and like minimum wage in California is like $20. So I mean, you're Marco's done a few of them as well, right? You've done one in New York, and then you did one at UCL. So we've had these programs come out and talk about their program. So just go back and watch them, and and I know that there's this thing that you have to do all and everything, and you can't. It's humanly impossible.
And I think those are great examples, right? Take it, the opportunities are there. I think just be very thoughtful if you're emailing, because I think sometimes I've often had students. So one thing is I have the students say, I'm an undergraduate. what are things that I could help in your space that would benefit you, rather than saying, hey, right, could there be, autoclaving, right? You're cleaning the beakers, right? There's things that you could do that other people can do, rather than say, I want to do research. It's really being conducive to that. And certainly the summer programs, you're designed to be able to do that. I just think when you write, the art of writing is more difficult than you think and how people receive it. Now, people tease me. I tease my current medical students. I said there's probably more people my age reading it than your age. So make sure you're keeping in mind who's reading the message. And people laugh at me. And I always write dear the name. I think they said, we know you're old because you write dear. But I tell the medical students, there's probably more people my age reading it. So it's probably better you put dear. If you're asking my age group, it's probably going to be received better, right? And there's probably people about 10 years younger than me that the hi is more formal. But I still, almost all my messages start with dear, which the young people said, we know you're old because you start the message with dear.
Dr. Teraguchi, you're not old, you're seasoned.
Okay, our next question says, when does UCR look at the primary application, and what is the general timeline for that, including secondaries, and when are acceptances first heard? Follow-up would be, when is the latest acceptance as well?
So kind of a timeline, general timeline is what I
Yeah,
heard.
timeline basically.
Right, so you apply in June, right? So then there's a whole release date at the end of June. So most schools get their applications in July. There's certain deadlines that I gave out on there. I believe our October is when we submit the final application, right? So as soon as you submit your application, we're starting to review them. So we have what we call a rolling deadline. So we start reviewing them as early as August and September. In October, you are allowed to start making offers. So there's sometimes offers in October. There are some deadlines that you have to meet for traffic rules. By March 15th, all medical schools, MD medical schools, have to make offers to the size of the class. So there's a rule that you have to at least make an offer of what the size of your class is, but there's rolling deadlines that are there. By April 15th, schools or applicants have to reduce their acceptances to 3. Then the end of April, they have to reduce it to 1. So you can have admits all the way through that piece, but pay attention to different deadlines. So ours is October 15th, I believe, for the can't remember if it's a secondary or the primary, but pay attention to the dates, and then they continue to be reviewed. Now, the tricky part of when you're accepted can be very tricky because it can be all the way up to orientation from waitlist. But the general rules is the 15th of April. Most medical schools, their interview processes stop around February and March because they have to admit their classes that are there. Now, we have something, different programs that are in place. We have something called a conditional admit. A lot of people are not aware of these. Conditional admit is something where we have a great student that is connected to many different ways to our mission. They're committed to the region, have demonstrated that they want to stay in this region, but maybe need some help academically. We're there. So we have something called a condition admit, where you get a contract and we actually enroll you in our master's program to help you out with your study skills and practice taking the MCAT. You complete that contract, you are then admitted to the med school automatically if you complete the contract. So it's a way to think beyond those metrics that are there. So the deadlines kind of vary, but the general ones is that June, July, get your application in early. Look at the deadlines for the med school, both secondaries and primary. It's usually in the fall, as early as October. And then roughly January, February is when the interviews start winding down. March, April, there can be admits, but you can admit all the way up into orientation. Our commit to enroll date, that's when your students are supposed to select when they're going to choose us and only us, is May 15th. But again, as people drop off the list, you can be admitted. We've had students admit as late as July, end of July, and sometimes right before August, but those tend to be very rare.
Dr. Teraguchi, I had a quick follow-up on something you mentioned. So what dictates whether you give someone a conditional offer and give them an opportunity to be in the master's program instead of just being flat out rejected, even that depending if other applicants may be stronger? in that case at the
I don't know
moment?
if there's applicant strong. Again, everybody has a different story, right? So the conditional med, is there something about the application where they might need additional support in some way, right? It could be even things like, maybe they don't have enough clinical exposure just because they didn't have access to it, right? So fail to read. But we're looking for folks that are going to help us achieve our mission. Okay. And we're often looking for what that investment is. Like many of you, I think Marco mentioned at the very beginning, if you're not in some of these programs, you don't get the right mentorship. Maybe you never did a summer program, so you just don't know. And that's just part of an access issue and guidance and mentoring, right? This is why this is a great program, to get you exposed to networking, asking how you get into a PI, right? Learning how to talk that language that's there and be able to articulate yourself in those spaces. So, but it's a great program because it allows a student who their full potential hasn't been reached yet, so we can be able to support that full potential.
And also these folks like Dr. Teraguchi that come here on a Friday evening is they want to be here. It's like, they're not like, they want to be here to inform you, and it's not, although, I do pester him, but that's a whole different story. But
yeah, I appreciate that. And, it's interesting for a lot of our third and fourth years, I have weekend office hours because that's when our students can meet. So I often offer the weekends and evenings and stuff like that, because that's also part of the nature, because you're in clinic all day. So when do you get to need to be mentored?
Got it. For the next question, it's let's see. I feel that everyone has their own unique story when applying to UCR while also showing ties to UCR, but what differentiates these stories across all these applicants from one another?
I don't know about what differentiates it. I think it's being able to tell your story, whatever your story is. I mean, there's a lot of similarities to them, but can you articulate what those pieces are? So I think writing is hard. I'm not a good writer. Articulating yourself. I think when I told Steve at the beginning, if you introduce yourself with your non-resume stuff, I bet you it won't come out as smooth because you're probably used to introducing yourself as, I'm going to the school, this is my major, right? And I think that is a big piece of this, is telling your story. So Steve, I said, tell me a little about yourself, but don't tell me anything on your resume. I'm going to guess you're going to have to think a little bit how to do that. Right? And it may come out a little clunky, but it's a skill set.
Okay, our next question says, how does UCR SOM support student wellness?
We have a dedicated office with wellness at Bell to support it. So we integrate it with academics as well. We know most students, and I tease our students a little bit here, the amount of how you all compare yourself to the world is baffling to me. So the first thing, if we give advice to students, apply to 10 medical schools. The first thing a lot of students do is, I'm going to look on some website and see if that's what other students are doing. Well, they're applying to 50. So now I'm going to apply to 50. Or we get, well, they got these scores. I need more scores, higher scores. So there is such a different level of mental health that we really help students help them navigate this world. A lot more test anxiety, understanding the pressures, be able to manage that as well. So we have a whole office that helps navigate academics and mental health and wellness, because those are often ties to each other where they're working there. Really creating affirmations. I have to meet with students. Make sure you wake up with affirmation and go to bed with affirmation. Okay? So giving them skills of building that piece. So we have we have them required, they're called Thrive check-ins. They are required for students. Some students really resist them, but they say, well, I don't need any help. But it's really to make sure they know to access the resources that are available to them, and making sure that when they have signs of burnout or struggle, that's there. Our curriculum side has been very gracious. We have what we call wellness days. So they're built into the curriculum to take a break. Now, wellness can be whatever you want, right? It might be sleeping, it may be going for a hike, but there's our breaks that we work with the curriculum to give you some days off to have that release time. So it's a big part of what we do. You saw all the financial aid. That is also about wellness, right? Financial wellness. We do a lot about debt management, how you manage your resources, If you have food insecurity, really working with the pantry. Again, it's making sure you can access all these different pieces that are there. One thing that has been interesting, I thought this was a funny ask, but our medical students asked to rent chargers. I thought, well, don't you bring your computer charger to school? But I guess it's very common that some people forget their charger. And then if you're at school all day, you can't charge it and you can't function. So what we've done is work with our IT department where they can check out whether it's your phone or your laptop, be able to do that piece that's there. So we always try to think about these little things that really matter to you in different ways. So that's our wellness is very holistic, not just isolated to one person, but it's across our school. Be able to look at whether it's finances, the social climate. We do something, we do a break at a release time. We do a fall festival, which is really good. Everybody dresses up in costumes. The students actually go around our building and do trick-or-treating. And the idea is really to build community that's here. We did a talent show as well. So the faculty, students, and staff come. So we want to create a community of support that we're not just one-dimensional beings and being in an academic space. So we really build it into the School of Medicine.
For the next question, this person is asking, do you have any advice for med school reapplicants? And does the admissions committee offer opportunities for feedback on the primary app before reapplying?
We do, as many of you may have heard, if you've long applied, we do a session to give feedback, general advice on reapplicants, as long as you're not in that current application cycle. I think it's really understanding and getting that good feedback. Why do you think you didn't get in? Now, one of the difficult things that I find for reapplicants, when we talk about the applicant cycle, right? So if you jump right into the application cycle again, so if you're in March, right, and you didn't hear, or April, you didn't hear in, and you apply again in June, it's very hard to do stuff in between there to figure out what your weaknesses is. Now, you may be doing things through the year, so that can be really challenging because a lot of admission committees don't realize if you reapply right away, you literally only have a few months to do anything with your application, right? Unless you knew you weren't getting in that whole year that you're in the application cycle, you're trying to build it. So I think make sure you sit down with somebody, be really thoughtful about where your areas that you maybe struggle, whether it's academics, it maybe some clinical, your rec letters. What are you doing to kind of look at those areas and address them, and what that looks like? So just being very open. I do think sometimes when people reply quickly, it's hard to make a lot of adjustments. And sometimes sometimes I've worked with folks. I've done this. There was a group of students I worked with, and they replied right away. And it was funny. I knew them all both the 2 years, but the first year, they never asked me for help. I said, why didn't you ever come to me and ask for help? And so I kind of teased them. Then the second year they applied, they asked me for help. We went through their secondary responses because I said they were struggling with the way that they respond to them. Meaning, many of you will get a question that asks you what a mistake is, a challenge, those kind of questions. You have to understand the intent of the question. And that's where the mentoring comes in. So I have to help people. I call it a 10%, 90% rule. When you get those mistakes or challenge or weakness, you don't want to spend 90% talking about the mistake or the weakness because that's what they're going to remember. What you want to do is spend 10% on the challenge, weakness, or mistake, and spend 90% of it of how you grew, learned, and became a better person. So helping the person just change their responses to them. They went from no interviews to 10 interviews in the next season. And it's simply articulating your story better and answering the questions in a way that is more receptive to the person on the other end. And they ultimately got into med school. Okay. So again, it depends on your circumstance, what the area of weakness is. But this was a pretty strong student. They just didn't get mentorship of how to write their story. And once we did that, I've done this twice. They got 0 interviews, and then they both got to medical school in the next round.
Wow, that's great to hear. Okay, my next question is, what does UCR SOM see as the biggest health care gaps in the IE right now, and how can we as students get involved in addressing them?
Say it one more time. I missed the beginning. I missed the first part of it.
So I'm trying to find it. Okay,
something
want-
about not from this area or something. I just missed what the front part was.
Yes, I got it. So it was what does UCI SOM see as the biggest healthcare gap in the IE at this current moment, and how can students like us help address them?
Go to
I mean,
medical
sure.
school and become practicing in those communities.
Yeah, it's short of physicians and healthcare practitioners generally, I think are the biggest things. And there's certain things with like insurances and coverage, but I think we really want to make sure that we're getting more physicians, healthcare providers in our area.
Next question we have are, what are your thoughts on hospital volunteering versus paid clinical jobs? Is hospital volunteering sufficient enough as clinical experience?
You probably hear me. It's the context of the whole application, right? Making sure those experiences are balanced. You just have to make sure you have some clinical experiences that you can refer to and that you know kind of the patient experience. I know we're getting close on time, correct?
Yes, sir.
Maybe one or two questions more. I don't know how many are left.
We have
There's about 10 more questions
10 left.
left.
Yeah, I can do a quick read and see if there's any ones that haven't been, like any other topics that haven't been addressed.
So somebody's asking, what are my chances of getting in if I have XYZ? And I would just say that this is a data that Dr. Teraguchi has given me permission to share, is 100% of people that don't apply don't get in. So that's like, and the only way that he could tell the full picture is you apply and go through the process. I mean, in a short paragraph, I think it's just really hard to look at someone's.
I think again, look at those components, like that chart I gave across your full application. Is there something that you're missing or a concern? And this is where you have to be a self-reflection. I've seen people apply to med school that have a 475 on the MCAT and a less than 3.0 GPA and no clinical experience, right? There are just some areas that you have to think about, okay, how am I going to learn about test prep? How am I going to improve that score, right? It's not just, gosh, I hope I'm going to get in, but you have to be very honest about what that competitive nature looks like overall.
Okay, I see two other questions that kind of have similar topics. It's talking about the early admissions program, the Thomas Hayter program. They just wanted to like hear a little bit more about it and what weighs into it.
So we're very grateful to Sama and Dr. Hyder, who created the program. Many of you may know UCR School of Medicine has been here for over 40, 50 years through collaboration with UCLA. Used to do 2 years of their preclinical with UCR, and then they would go to UCLA for their clinical years. Now, that was a great program. UCLA is a great medical school. I think the challenge is that they recruited applicants from all over the nation and probably internationally. So when they came to UCR and then transferred to UCLA, they never came back, right? They went off in the world and did great things, which is okay, right? That's a great mission. But the community here really wanted physicians to work for. So Mrs. Hyder and Dr. Thomas Hyder wanted to help facilitate more folks coming to UCR that had a commitment to our area. So what he did was tie it to UCR undergraduates. So if you're a UC undergraduate that stay here for at least 6 semesters or 6 quarters, you are then eligible to apply. And the idea was to keep our best and brightest that are committed to our area. So there is a GPA requirement for that at 3.4. You must have that when you apply and when you matriculate. You you can only apply to us. There's a simple application. You are then selected in that process to come to med school the following year. So it's a really great opportunity through our UCR undergraduate opportunities, but the design really was always how to get folks from our UC undergraduate committed. And that's a really, really great place. You don't have to be from this area, but if you go to undergraduate here, get involved in the community, really fall in love with this area and really want to contribute. It's a great, we've had people from NorCal really be transplants down here and stay here for their practicing physician. So that program is very competitive. We usually get, you have to go to UCR and you have to have a certain number of quarters, 6 quarters, to be eligible to apply.
And a quick follow-up, would that also, so transfers, like incoming transfers could still be eligible for that, right?
Yeah, you just need the 6 quarters.
Okay.
Yes, if you transfer, what we avoid is people trying to come in through UCR and only be 1 quarter and be eligible. We want to make sure you're committed to our region. So that's why we have the 6 quarters. So, and there's no credit limit for those quarters. So if you're a transfer student, come in the summer and you have a credit, that's where the quarters start.
If you have time for one more question, I feel like this would be helpful to this person. They're a current applicant to UCR this cycle, native to North Orange County. However, they haven't received an interview to UCR yet. They're asking, what can I do at this point of the process to strengthen my candidacy?
So once you submit your application, and this is true for most medical schools, that's your application, right? So this is right, making sure you're ready. If you want to strengthen your application, again, what's the timing that you should apply? Like if there are more things you should do, that's there. But we evaluate what you submitted on application, so you don't need to send any more information at that time. But like I said, we're going to enroll in admission, so we could offer interviews as late into January or February. So just be patient. But if you feel like you can strengthen your application, certainly be honest about that if you have to apply the next cycle.
All right. Well, I think we could keep you here till 10 o'clock at night, but we're gonna have to let you go. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. And hopefully everything was useful. Hopefully the interactive piece kept people engaged. There's peace. And like I said, always happy to do it when I'm available.
Thank you again. Hope you have a great weekend. And thank you for coming again.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend. Good to see everybody.
Happy holidays.